I never kept a list. I just paid the bills when they came in. New tires for his truck, insurance after his little accident, a part of the money for the kitchen repair. When Mom said, "Kevin can't manage it again," at first it felt temporary, like a small favor until he got back on his feet. Then it turned into a routine. Year after year, one thing after another. He changed jobs almost as often as he changed apartments, moving from place to place around Atlanta, always with some excuse, always with a promise that things would get better soon. He would call me late at night, his voice tired, asking me not to tell anyone, asking me to just help him one more time. I always said yes. I always helped. 12 years passed like that. No thank you notes, no real signs of gratitude. It was like the money just disappeared into a hole that never closed. I didn't think about it much. I told myself it was family. That was what you were supposed to do. I worked in my little office in Savannah, paid my bills on time, stayed out of trouble. Compared to all the mess Kevin kept finding himself in, my life looked boring and plain. Maybe that's why I never complained. Maybe I thought that helping him made my quiet life feel like it mattered more. That afternoon, it was hot outside, and I was standing in the kitchen making tea. I had my back to the living room. The window over the sink was open, and I could hear the cicadas buzzing outside. I poured hot water into my mug, watching the steam rise. In the other room, Kevin was talking loudly on the phone. I wasn't really listening until one sentence cut through everything. "She just sits in her little office all day. That's all she does." I froze. My hand tightened around the handle of the kettle. I didn't turn around. I didn't say anything. I just finished pouring the tea, set the kettle down, and took a sip. The taste was bitter, too strong. I stood there for a few seconds, letting the heat burn my tongue a little. Then I put the mug down, walked to my bedroom, and closed the door behind me. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor. It wasn't about the words, not really. It was about everything that had built up underneath them. Years of missed birthdays because he needed a loan. Years of canceled vacations because something came up and he needed help with rent. Years of hearing Mom ask me to be patient, to understand, because Kevin was going through a rough time. I opened my laptop, logged into my online banking account, and looked at the credit card linked to his emergencies. I stared at the balance, at the payments I had made month after month without even thinking. It wasn't a crazy amount by itself, but it was years of small cuts, little sacrifices I never spoke about. It wasn't even about the money. It was about what it had turned me into, some invisible safety net he didn't even bother to thank. Without hesitating, I clicked on the settings and closed the card. A message popped up asking if I was sure. I clicked yes. Another message said the account would be closed immediately and the card deactivated. I stared at the screen for a second, watching the confirmation line appear, feeling something heavy lift off my chest. I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel sad. I felt empty, but in a clean way, like clearing out a room that had been cluttered for too long. I closed the laptop and sat still for a long time. Outside, the sun was starting to set, casting a soft golden light across the floor. The house was quiet except for the faint sounds of Kevin still talking in the living room, still complaining, still not knowing that everything had just changed. Later that night, I made myself a simple dinner: toasted bread, some cheese, a handful of grapes. I sat at the kitchen table and ate slowly, without checking my phone, without waiting for someone to call or ask for something. Kevin didn't notice anything different. He left that evening without saying goodbye, just slammed the door behind him like always. I washed my plate, dried it carefully, and put it back in the cupboard. I made another cup of tea, this time adding a little honey. I sat on the porch with the mug in my hands, listening to the crickets sing in the tall grass. The stars were starting to come out, one by one. I thought about the years that had passed, about the way I had made myself small to keep the peace, about how many times I had told myself it was temporary, that it was just what good sisters did. But it was never temporary. It was never going to change unless I changed it myself. I sipped my tea, let the night air wrap around me, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I owed anyone anything. I just felt free. I didn't sleep that night, not because I regretted anything, but because my mind kept turning in circles. I kept trying to remember when it had all changed. When did I stop being just a sister and start being his personal bank? I stared at the ceiling in the dark, feeling the hours crawl by. I thought about all the times he had called, saying it was just a small thing, just until next week, just until he found a better job. I thought about how many times Mom had asked me to be patient because Kevin was going through a rough time. It was always a rough time for him. It seemed like it never ended. I had rough times too. I had moments when my car broke down, when my rent went up, when I sat at my desk with my head in my hands wondering how I would make it through the month. But I never asked anyone for help. I worked harder. I stayed late. I saved every dollar I could. I didn't expect anyone to fix it for me. And yet, somehow, helping him became part of my life, like brushing my teeth or paying my own bills. It wasn't a decision anymore. It was automatic. As the night dragged on, I kept thinking about that one sentence he said. She just sits in her little office all day. All those years of helping, of sending money without asking for anything in return, and that was what he thought of me. I was just someone who sat at a desk and lived an easy life. He didn't see the long nights, the canceled plans, the sacrifices I made. He didn't see anything at all. Maybe he never had. Maybe none of them had. By morning, my mind was made up. I opened my laptop, the screen too bright in the early light, and logged into my work portal. I filled out a request for vacation leave. 2 weeks, starting immediately. I didn't even check if it would be approved. I just hit send. After that, I opened a travel site and searched for flights. No thinking, no second guessing, just action. I found a flight to Rome that left that evening. It wasn't cheap, but I didn't care. I clicked book and chose a small hotel near the river, one with a balcony overlooking the water. The pictures showed white curtains billowing in the breeze, old stone streets glowing under the sun, little cafes tucked into corners. It looked like peace. It looked like a place where no one would ask me for anything. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long breath. I wasn't running away. I wasn't slamming doors or shouting at anyone. I was just leaving, by my own choice, for the first time in years. It felt strange. It felt powerful. I packed lightly. A few dresses, a good pair of shoes for walking, a journal I hadn't written in for months. I didn't text Mom. I didn't tell Kevin. I didn't even tell my coworkers beyond the formal leave request. It wasn't out of anger. I just didn't owe anyone an explanation. For once, my life didn't need to be weighed against anyone else's needs. As I zipped up my suitcase, I felt a flicker of nervousness. Not about the trip, but about what would be waiting when I came back. Would they even notice I was gone? Would they finally realize how much I had been holding together all these years? Maybe. Maybe not. But it wasn't my job to hold them together anymore. I looked around my little apartment in Savannah. The morning sun was coming in through the windows, making patterns on the wooden floor. My plants by the window were still green and alive. The coffee cup from last night still sitting clean and empty by the sink. Everything was simple. Everything was mine. I pulled out a postcard from the kitchen drawer, one that I had bought years ago and never sent. It showed the Ponte Sant'Angelo in Rome, the bridge lined with statues and history. I smiled a little to myself and tucked it into my suitcase. Maybe I would finally walk across it. Maybe I would finally stand somewhere and feel like I belonged. Not because someone needed something from me, but just because I was there. By noon, I had my bags packed, my passport in hand, my heart racing with something that felt a little like fear, but even more like freedom. The cab arrived exactly on time. I locked the door behind me, slipping the key into my purse. No looking back, no hesitation. As we pulled away from the curb, I looked out the window one last time. The streets of my neighborhood were quiet, kids playing on bikes, an old man watering his lawn. Ordinary life. It would go on, with or without me. I leaned back against the seat and closed my eyes. I wasn't running. I wasn't escaping. I was choosing something for myself, maybe for the first time in my life. And that was enough. Rome was quiet. For the first time in many years, I woke up without a knot of worry sitting in my chest. No alarm, no rush, no running lists of things I had to fix for someone else. I opened the balcony doors and stepped outside. The morning air was fresh and soft, carrying the smell of fresh bread from a bakery down the street. I sat at the small table with a cup of coffee, a slice of bread with soft cheese, and a handful of sweet fruit from the corner market. I ate slowly, watching the world move without me. People passed below, speaking in soft bursts of Italian, laughing, carrying baskets of groceries or flowers. I didn't check my phone. I didn't even bring it out onto the balcony. For once, there was no sense of missing something important, no pressure to be ready to solve a problem. I let the morning stretch out as long as it wanted. After breakfast, I wandered the streets. The stone alleys twisted and turned, leading me past colorful doorways and little fountains tucked between buildings. Bright umbrellas hung between rooftops, swinging gently in the breeze. I stopped at cafes when I felt like it, sat by the river, watched the street artists painting quick scenes on scraps of paper. My phone stayed buried at the bottom of my bag, silent. Kevin didn't call. Mom didn't call. Nobody needed anything from me. It felt strange at first, like stepping out onto ice that might crack at any moment. But each hour that passed without a demand, without a guilt-filled message, made the ground feel steadier under my feet. I let myself breathe in a way I hadn't in years. A week went by like that. Days of coffee and sunlight and long walks that ended wherever I wanted. I started to forget to worry. I started to forget the heavy feeling of being responsible for someone else's mistakes. I was remembering what it felt like to just be myself, without the weight of everyone else's needs pulling at my sleeves. Then one afternoon, my phone buzzed. Just once. I almost didn't check it, but curiosity got the better of me. It was a message from Mom. No long explanations, no anger, just a simple question. Where are you? Kevin is asking how to pay the internet bill. I told him to ask his sister. I stared at the screen for a long moment. There was no blaming in her words, no guilt thrown at me like before. Just a small, plain sentence. It was like a tiny window had opened in a house that had always been locked up tight. For the first time, maybe, she wasn't expecting me to jump in and fix everything. For the first time, she had told him to figure it out himself. I didn't answer with words. I didn't explain where I was or what I was doing. I just opened my camera, took a picture of the street in front of me, a narrow old alley, colorful umbrellas stretched across the sky, a little table with a half-finished cup of coffee. I attached the photo to the message and typed 2 words. I'm resting. I sent it without hesitation, tucked the phone back into my bag, and kept walking. There was nothing more to say. The air smelled like warm stone and blooming flowers. I turned a corner and found a small piazza where musicians played soft songs under the shade of an old tree. I sat on the edge of the fountain and listened, letting the notes drift through me. The sunlight touched my shoulders, and for once, I didn't feel like I needed to be anywhere else or be anyone else. Somewhere back home, Kevin was learning what it meant to solve his own problems. Somewhere back home, Mom was learning that I wasn't just a safety net she could pull tight whenever she needed to. Maybe they didn't like it. Maybe they didn't understand it yet. But that wasn't my burden to carry anymore. I had given them enough of my time, my money, and my quiet sacrifices. I had given more than they ever asked from each other. And now, finally, I was giving something back to myself. A little peace. A little freedom. I leaned back, closed my eyes for a moment, and listened to the music mix with the sound of the fountain. No guilt, no anger, just space, just air, just life moving forward, slow and steady, with me finally choosing where to step next. When I came back, the apartment felt fresh and still, like it had been holding its breath the whole time I was away. The windows were closed, but the air inside was clean, untouched. It was strange at first. I had expected to feel a wave of sadness or regret walking through the door, But all I felt was calm. No one had been here. No one had waited for me or expected anything from me. The apartment was exactly how I had left it. In the kitchen, there was still a grocery list taped to the fridge, the one I had scribbled quickly a few days before leaving for Rome. Milk, bread, eggs, a reminder to pick up coffee. I stood there for a moment, reading it, feeling like it belonged to someone else's life. Without thinking too much, I pulled it down and tossed it into the trash. It didn't matter anymore. That list belonged to a version of me who always planned ahead for other people, who thought she needed to be ready to catch every falling piece. That wasn't my job now. For 2 days, the phone stayed silent. I unpacked slowly, washed my clothes, opened the windows to let the soft savanna air drift through. I sat on the balcony in the evenings, sipping tea, listening to the distant hum of the city. It was peaceful in a way I hadn't known I needed. No demands, no emergencies. Just quiet days unfolding one after another. Then the call came. It was Mom. Her voice was softer than usual, without the sharp edge it sometimes had when she needed something from me. She didn't ask where I had been, or why I hadn't answered earlier. She just said it quietly, almost like she wasn't sure if she should be saying it at all. Kevin is having a hard time. But maybe this needed to happen. She told me he had tried to pay his bills himself. At first, he had stumbled. Missed a payment here, forgot about a deadline there. When the money ran short, he started calling around, asking friends for help. But no one sent anything. No one dropped everything to fix his problems the way I always had. Mom said he was angry now. He didn't understand why no one would step in. He didn't know how it felt to reach out and find no safety net waiting. But I knew. I had lived that way for years, without expecting anyone to catch me if I fell. I worked late, stretched paychecks, made sacrifices without asking for help. It wasn't because I thought I had to prove something, it was just survival. I had learned how to stand on my own feet a long time ago, quietly, without drama. Listening to Mom talk, I realized she wasn't asking me to step back in. There was no hidden plea for me to fix it this time. Maybe she finally saw the difference between helping someone because you love them and being used because they expect you to. After we hung up, I sat by the window and watched the street below. People walked their dogs, kids rode bikes. The world moved on without noticing anything different. Kevin's world was changing now, but it wasn't my responsibility to fix it. He had to learn what it felt like to face hard days without a safety net. He had to learn what it meant to take responsibility for his own life, the way I had been doing all along. I didn't feel happy about it. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt free. Free from the endless cycle of rescue and resentment. Free from the invisible weight that had hung over my shoulders for so long, I had almost forgotten it was there. In the quiet of my apartment, I realized something important. My life didn't revolve around Kevin's emergencies anymore. It didn't revolve around waiting for the next crisis or the next guilt-laced phone call. My life was mine now. My time was mine. My peace was mine. I leaned back in the chair and let the stillness settle around me like a soft blanket. I didn't need to fix anything. I didn't need to prepare for anything. For the first time in years, I could just be. And it was enough. A week later, we ran into each other by accident at the grocery store. I wasn't thinking about him. I was just grabbing a few things for dinner, moving through the aisles without any real hurry. When I turned the corner by the pasta section, I saw him. Kevin stood there with a bag of spaghetti in one hand, staring down at his phone with a look of frustration. His thumb moved quickly across the screen, like he was checking his bank balance or looking for something he didn't want to find. I stopped for a second, not because I wanted to, but because my body froze on its own. Then I shifted, walking toward the self-checkout lanes, choosing the farthest one from where he stood. I didn't need a conversation. I didn't need to open old doors. But he saw me. Of course he did. I heard his footsteps behind me as I scanned my few items. I kept my eyes on the little screen, acting like I hadn't noticed. Still, I could feel him standing there, holding that bag of pasta like it weighed more than it should. He didn't say hello. He didn't smile. He just stood there awkwardly, like he wasn't sure what he was allowed to say anymore. When I finally glanced at him, I saw something I hadn't seen before. No anger, no fake charm, no apology either, just confusion. A kind of lost look, like he had stepped out onto a road he didn't know how to walk. I didn't feel hate. I didn't feel pity. I felt nothing sharp or loud, just a deep, steady quiet inside myself, a space where the old sense of duty used to live. He opened his mouth, searching for words. He looked almost small somehow, not because he was shorter or weaker, but because he no longer had the weight of my help holding him up. Without it, he looked uncertain, exposed in a way he had never been before. He finally asked if it was true, if I had really canceled everything. I nodded once, not adding anything. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, uncomfortable. I could tell he wanted to say more, maybe explain or defend himself, but he didn't know how to start. He tried to bring up Mom, like maybe that would pull me back in. Like maybe mentioning her would remind me of the old patterns where I stepped forward and handled everything for everyone. But I didn't let him finish. I cut him off gently but firmly, my voice steady and clear. Mom is an adult. I don't make decisions for everyone anymore. For a second, he just stood there, holding his grocery bag, blinking like he hadn't expected me to say that out loud. Maybe he had always counted on me being there, ready to fix, ready to carry what he dropped. Maybe he was only now realizing that safety net was gone. I paid for my groceries, gathered my things, and walked past him without looking back. My heart wasn't pounding. My hands weren't shaking. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel cruel. I just felt free. As I stepped out into the parking lot, the sun was starting to set, casting a soft golden light across the asphalt. People pushed carts loaded with groceries. Kids laughed near the entrance. Life moved around me without any weight pulling at my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't carrying someone else's mistakes. I wasn't the backup plan, the secret wallet, the invisible support system. I was just a woman with a bag of groceries heading home to a life that finally belonged to her. My steps felt lighter. My breathing felt easier. I wasn't angry. I wasn't triumphant. I was just moving forward in a world that felt bigger and brighter than it had in years. Kevin stayed behind near the self-checkout, still holding his pasta, still caught in a story that wasn't mine anymore. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. My life wasn't tied to his anymore. My value wasn't measured by how much I could save him. I had already saved the only person I was ever truly responsible for, myself. 3 months went by. Life settled into a quieter rhythm, one that didn't spin around other people's needs. Mom stopped asking for help. She didn't call me with guilt in her voice anymore, didn't start conversations with a heavy sigh. Sometimes she would stop by with a small box of homemade muffins or a loaf of fresh bread. She never stayed long. She would hand it to me with a soft smile and just say something simple, like, "You look good." No hidden meanings, no pressure. Just words, small but real. At first, I didn't know what to do with the space that opened up around me. For so long, my mind had been busy with worries that weren't even mine. Now, with that space clear, I started to remember the pieces of myself I had put aside. I picked up a notebook I hadn't touched in years and started writing again. Little stories, bits of thoughts, ideas I had once promised myself I would come back to. On weekends, I got into my car and drove out of the city just to be surrounded by quiet. Sometimes I found small lakes or trails where the only sound was the wind moving through the trees. Sometimes I just parked near a field, rolled down the windows, and let the stillness sink into me. There was no rush, no one asking where I was or what I was doing, no invisible clock ticking down to the next responsibility. The money I used to send away every month stayed in my account now. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to feel steady. Enough to know that if something unexpected happened, I could handle it without panic. But more than the money, it was the feeling that mattered. The feeling that I wasn't tied to anyone else's mistakes anymore. For the first time, maybe ever, I didn't feel like I owed anyone anything. Not apologies, not explanations, not pieces of my life carved out to keep someone else comfortable. Even with family, maybe especially with family, I understood now that love isn't supposed to come with debt. I didn't look for recognition. I didn't hope for big apologies or dramatic thank yous. I didn't wait for anyone to notice the quiet way I had rebuilt my life. Some days, the thought of how much I had given without being seen would pass through my mind, but it didn't burn like it used to. It was just something that had happened, and now it was over. I no longer paid, not with my money and not with my peace. I no longer rushed to fix things that were never mine to fix. I didn't stand in the background, waiting for scraps of kindness or moments of approval. I stood on my own, not in a loud or angry way, but with a steady kind of pride. I was not a safety net anymore, not a silent backup plan tucked away in someone else's mind. I was a person, a full person, with a life that didn't have to be justified or explained. A person who could sit by herself in the late afternoon sun and feel perfectly whole. And that, I realized, was enough. It had always been enough. I just needed to believe it for myself. Sometimes, when I pass by the grocery store or sit at a little cafe with a coffee and a blank page in front of me, I wonder if Kevin ever figured things out for himself. I wonder if Mom misses the old ways, where everything was smoothed over without effort. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But it doesn't matter now. I chose myself. I chose peace. I chose to believe that my life mattered, even when no one needed something from me. That choice was the real gift, the real turning point. And every quiet morning, every simple afternoon, every breath of air that didn't feel heavy with someone else's expectations, reminded me that I had finally come home to myself.